I know everyone wants to call this a totally killer ripoff, and I get it, but in reality, this movie was made and finished first, like a year before Totally Killer. But the question is this one better? Well,
20 years ago, my sister and 3 other students were murdered.
so Lucy accidentally finds a time machine and travels back to 2003, the year her sister was murdered by an unknown serial killer, and decides to stop the person who committed the crime. It's Back to the Future meets Scream. That's the pitch, right? That's what they're trying to do. That's what they tried to do with Totally Killer. I thought that movie had some charm. It's not great, but it had some elements that I really liked, and it had the aspect of, oh, this is kind of a slasher, so we're going to treat it as such. That's something that I believe this movie is lacking. When it says it's trying to be Back to the Future meets Scream, it completely fails on the Scream front, because honestly, they not only avoid the kills and the blood and the slasher element, there wasn't really a time here where I was on the edge of my seat or even cared what was happening with the murderer. And there's a question surrounding the murderer that for me wasn't really a question. I'm like, oh yeah, it's that person. And sure enough, I was right. That doesn't mean everyone's going to be right, but I was right because I've seen a movie. But I want to make sure people know that all I'm seeing on IMDb is this movie rips off Totally Killer. And I would have thought that too, but it doesn't. Neither of them are ripping off anyone. It just so happened that they're coming out similarly or around the same time. That happens all the time, by the way. I forgot the term. There's a term when 2 movies come out at the exact same time, almost, and they're very similar, but this just so happens to be the case. That being said, this movie kind of fails at most of the things it tries to do. I just didn't really care about the characters, and they try to build them up. They try to set up our main girl as someone who is, trying to go out and achieve her dreams. Her family is still kind of living in the past, reeling from what happened to her sister. And Madison Bailey's Lucy's like, darn, let's go back to the past. Now, I want to talk about this time machine, this MacGuffin here, that's very, it's very odd. This film is very sci-fi. I would argue it's more sci-fi than it is horror. It's more teen coming of age than it is horror. It's not really horror. I know it says it on IMDb. It's lying. Liar! And if it is a slasher, well, then it's the most tame slasher. It's the most PG slasher I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I guess there were some moments where you look down and see blood, but it's like, oh man, that would have been cool to actually see what happened to that person, if that's what you're into. And if it's not what you're into, why are you watching this? You know what I mean? It's kind of like, know your audience. I don't know if this movie knows who its audience is. Well, maybe you like coming-of-age stories, and it's what you're kind of getting here with these 2 sisters. When they interact, she's going back to the past and hanging out with her, but she's also trying to figure out how are we going to make things right, because something really tragic happened. You have questions surrounding it, but you're also sitting back thinking, okay, well, if she does this, then what happens to her? And this movie addresses those questions, I guess. It never really gives you a full answer as to why what's happening is happening, but it also leaves you by the end of the film scratching your head like, what was the point?
Why?
Because even if you care about our characters and you're into it, by the end of the movie, Lucy does something. She makes a decision or series of decisions to where I, as an audience member, am going, why? You know, like, what's the point? And even if you understand why she's doing the thing that she's doing, because they mention it in passing in like 5 seconds, it's like, whoa. I want to know more about that. Like, you just mentioned this thing, and then we cut to credits. It's like, that's the most interesting part of the movie. Why did that happen? Because, again, we get no answers with the time-traveling questions that I'm asking numerous times throughout this film, and I cared way more about that than I did the slasher aspect, but it's also, you just don't care about the story. The writing is so mediocre. It has that Netflix rom-com coming-of-age writing applied to the slasher genre. At least they're hoping for that, even though, again, I wouldn't call it that. And it mixes together so awkwardly to where you just don't really care about what is happening. And the performances, again, they're fine, but they're also just like, yeah, they didn't do enough to elevate the material. I always love me some Griffin Gluck. Griffin Gluck, every time he pops up, most of the time on Netflix, I'm on board. I think the guy is great. And he was charming here. But even then, there were things I had about his character as we're going, not to spoil things, but I'm just like, dang. But if you did... Oh. Look, whether it was before Totally Killer, after Totally Killer, it doesn't matter. This movie just doesn't work for what it's trying to do. I think some people will have some fun with the characters, maybe get some things out of the relationship, and it's bright and sweet at times, but it's a slasher. Why is the slasher doing that? And again, the ending, what was that, man?
This is bad. This is very, very bad.
Before I give you my score, what is your favorite time travel movie that isn't Back to the Future? That's too obvious. And if you want to see more Netflix reviews, specifically a couple this weekend, dropping that thumbs up tells me so. Time Cut just doesn't understand its audience, nor does it give our characters anything interesting to do with this quote-unquote unique concept. This slasher is afraid to be a slasher, and frankly, I just thought it would be a little more fun than it was. I liked the soundtrack. I guess I gotta give it that. I didn't say that. I should have said that. I enjoyed the soundtrack, and I enjoyed the timeliness of the early 2000s. So, gotta give it credit where credit is due. Yeah, that's Time Cut on Netflix. I'm gonna forget this by tomorrow. All right, see you soon.